You set that alarm on purpose. You chose 5 a.m. You read the articles. You watch the videos. You told yourself this was the decision that was going to change everything. And maybe it did feel different those first few mornings. Quiet. Still. Like you had a secret the rest of the world hadn't figured out yet. Here's what nobody told you. Your brain at 5 a.m. is not the sharp, focused, high-performance machine the productivity world promised you. For most people, and the science on this is now very clear, 5 a.m. is one of the worst times to demand peak cognitive function from your brain. Not because you're lazy, not because you're doing it wrong, because of something that's been running inside you since before you were born, and by the end of this, you're going to understand exactly what that is. The 5 a.m. movement has a very specific origin story. It didn't come from neuroscience, it didn't come from sleep research, it came from a book. Robin Sharma's The 5 a.m. Club, published in 2018, sold over 3 million copies. It proposed a simple formula: wake at 5, split the first hour into exercise, reflection, and learning, and you would outperform everyone around you. The idea spread fast. CEOs posted their 5 a.m. routines. Influencers built entire brands around it. The content machine fed on it for years, and millions of people set their alarms back. Here's what those millions of people were never told. Robin Sharma is not a neuroscientist. He's a motivational speaker. And the science of what actually happens inside the human brain in the hours after midnight, that science tells a very different story. A story that starts with something called your circadian rhythm. You've heard the term. But most people don't understand what it actually controls. It's not just your sleep schedule. Your circadian rhythm regulates your body temperature, your cortisol production, your cognitive processing speed, your memory consolidation, your emotional regulation, and the precise timing of all of these varies from person to person based on something encoded in your DNA. That something is called your chronotype, and this is where the 5 a.m. story gets complicated. Research from the University of Munich, one of the largest chronotype studies ever conducted, covering over 65,000 participants, found that humans fall on a spectrum from extreme early types to extreme late types. True early chronotypes, people whose biology genuinely peaks in the early morning hours, make up less than 15% of the adult population, which means for roughly 85% of people setting that 5 a.m. alarm, they are waking up inside a biological window their brain was not designed to perform in. But here's the part nobody asks. What is actually happening inside your brain at that moment? When the alarm goes off at 5 a.m. and you force yourself upright, what does the science say is going on in there? That's what we're going to go through, system by system. And there's one specific brain process that peaks, not at 5 a.m., not at 6 a.m., but at a time most productivity gurus have never mentioned. We'll get to exactly when that is, and why it changes the entire argument. Your body has its own alarm system. It's called the cortisol awakening response. About 30 to 45 minutes before your natural wake time, the time your chronotype is actually wired for, your brain begins releasing cortisol, not a flood. A careful graduated surge, this cortisol serves a specific purpose. It primes your immune system. It triggers alertness. It prepares your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for decision-making, planning, and focus, to come online. Think about that for a second. Your brain has a built-in preparation sequence, a biological runway, and it's calibrated precisely to your natural wake time. When you set a 5 a.m. alarm, and your chronotype is not a 5 a.m. chronotype, you are interrupting that runway mid-sequence. A 2020 study published in the journal Psychoneuroendocrinology found that forced early waking significantly before your natural cortisol surge, resulted in measurably higher levels of psychological stress throughout the entire day. Not just in the morning, the entire day. The researchers called it social jet lag. You are functionally jet-lagged, not from flying across time zones, but from flying against your own biology 5 mornings a week. And here's what social jet lag actually does to your cognitive performance. A team at the University of Pittsburgh measured processing speed, working memory, and attention in participants across different wake times. People waking more than 2 hours before their natural chronotype showed cognitive performance equivalent to waking after only 4 hours of sleep, even when total sleep time was adequate. You could sleep a full 8 hours, set your alarm 2 hours early, and show up to your morning operating like you barely slept. That is what most people in the 5 a.m. club are actually doing. But cortisol is only the first layer, because what happens to your brain's memory systems at 5 a.m. is a different story entirely, and this one directly affects whether anything you learn or do in that golden hour actually sticks. Here's something the 5 a.m. productivity content never explains. Sleep is not one process, it's a cycle. And the specific stage of sleep that handles memory consolidation, the stage that takes what you experienced yesterday and permanently files it into long-term memory, that stage is called REM sleep. REM sleep doesn't distribute itself evenly through the night. It concentrates. The longer you sleep, the more REM you accumulate. The bulk of your REM sleep, the most memory-intensive portion, happens in the final 90 minutes before your natural wake time. When you set that 5 a.m. alarm and your natural wake time is 7 a.m., you are cutting off the exact window where your brain is doing its most critical memory work. Matthew Walker, a neuroscientist at UC Berkeley and the author of Why We Sleep, described this as the neurological equivalent of pressing delete on everything you learned the day before the save completed. Think about what you did yesterday. The meeting, the book chapter, the skill you practiced, the conversation you had. If you cut your sleep short, even by 90 minutes, your brain may not have finished filing any of it. And yet the 5 a.m. productivity formula tells you to wake early and immediately start learning. Read, study, journal. Input more information into a brain that hasn't finished processing yesterday's yet. It's like trying to add more files to a hard drive while it's still running a critical system update. Now, you might be thinking, what about the people it actually works for? What about the people who genuinely feel better waking at 5? What's different about their brains? That answer is real, and it's important, because it explains not just who benefits from 5 a.m., but when, exactly, the human brain hits its actual cognitive peak. And the answer is not what you expect. Research on human cognitive performance, specifically from studies at Harvard Medical School and the Salk Institute, has identified something called the peak alertness window. For the average chronotype id, which represents the majority of adults, this window opens approximately 2 to 4 hours after natural wake time. Not 5 a.m., not even 6 a.m. 2 to 4 hours after you naturally wake up. For someone whose body is calibrated to wake at 7 a.m., peak cognitive performance lands somewhere between 9 a.m. and 11 a.m. For someone naturally waking at 6 a.m., it's 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. This is when your prefrontal cortex is fully online. This is when working memory is at maximum capacity. This is when your brain's ability to make connections, to think creatively, analytically, strategically, is operating at its highest level. And the 5 a.m. movement, for most people, is scheduling their most productive hours 3 to 4 hours before that window even opens. Now, here's where it gets genuinely interesting. For true early chronotypes, that 15%, this math is completely different. Their natural wake time is 5 a.m. or earlier. Their cortisol surge is already running. Their cognitive peak lands in that 7 to 9 a.m. range. For these people, the 5 a.m. advice is biologically accurate. They are not more disciplined. They are not more committed. Their DNA runs on a different clock. And every person who has ever beaten themselves up for failing to sustain a 5 a.m. routine, every person who felt lazy or weak or undisciplined, may have been fighting a battle that was never winnable, not because of willpower, because of genetics. But there's one more piece of this, and it's the piece that changes how you should think about your entire morning, regardless of what time you wake up. While you sleep, your brain clears a chemical called adenosine. Adenosine is a byproduct of brain activity. It builds up throughout the day and creates what neuroscientists call sleep pressure. The longer you're awake, the more adenosine accumulates, the more you feel the pull toward sleep. Sleep clears it. That's one of sleep's primary biological functions, clearing this chemical so your brain can start fresh. But here's what matters for the 5 a.m. conversation. Adenosine doesn't clear at a fixed rate. It clears in proportion to the total duration and quality of your sleep. If you cut your sleep short, especially in those final REM-rich hours, your brain hasn't finished clearing it. Which means when you sit down at 5 a.m. with your journal and your coffee, part of what you're feeling as groggy or not quite there is not tiredness in the conventional sense. It's residual adenosine that your brain didn't have time to clear. The coffee helps. Temporarily, caffeine works by blocking adenosine receptors. It doesn't clear the adenosine, it just prevents you from feeling it. The moment the caffeine wears off, the adenosine reasserts itself. That's the midday crash. You felt this before, that 2 p.m. wall, the sudden drop in focus and energy. Most people blame lunch, most people blame their diet. What's actually happening is the adenosine your brain didn't clear at 5 a.m., plus the adenosine you've accumulated since then, breaking through when the caffeine buffer clears. The 5 a.m. alarm didn't just affect your morning, it set up the crash that hit you 6 hours later. All of this raises one direct question. If 5 a.m. is biologically misaligned for most people, why does it feel like it works? Why do millions of people report feeling better, more productive, more in control when they start waking early? That answer is real, and it matters because it contains the one piece of this science that you can actually use. Here's the truth that the 5 a.m. debate misses entirely. The people who report genuine benefits from waking early are not benefiting from the specific time. They are benefiting from 3 things that have nothing to do with 5 a.m. The first is protected time. Most people who adopt a 5 a.m. routine do it because they have no other quiet time. Families, jobs, notifications, the day gets swallowed. 5 a.m. is silence. It's the only window where no one needs anything from them. The neuroscience here is real. Uninterrupted time, free from social demands and reactive decision-making, does produce measurable gains in focus and creative thinking. But the silence is what's working, not the 5. If you have a protected, uninterrupted 90-minute block starting at 7:30 a.m., after your natural wake time, after your cortisol surge, inside your cognitive peak window, the brain science says you will outperform the person who dragged themselves up at 5 a.m. every single time. The second is intentionality. People who commit to a 5 a.m. routine are not just changing when they wake up. They're changing how they think about their time. They're going to bed earlier. They're planning their mornings. They're making decisions about how to spend their first hour instead of reacting to their phone. That intentionality, that planning behavior, activates the prefrontal cortex in ways that produce real outcomes. The neuroscience is real, but it's the intentionality, not the 5 a.m. You can apply that same intentionality to your natural wake time and get more cognitive return on it because your brain is actually ready. And the third, this is the one nobody talks about. In 2022, a team at the National Institutes of Health published findings from an 8-year longitudinal study on sleep timing and long-term cognitive health. The study tracked over 8,000 adults. The participants who consistently woke more than 90 minutes before their natural chronotype, year after year, showed measurably accelerated cognitive decline compared to those who woke within 30 minutes of their natural wake time. Not in a single morning. Over years. Forcing your brain to operate against its biological clock doesn't just underperform in the short term. Over time, it accumulates. The chronic sleep disruption, the suppressed REM, the uncleared adenosine, These have a long-term cost that a productivity book published in 2018 never accounted for. Sit with that for a moment. The 5 a.m. routine that was supposed to give you your best life, if your chronotype isn't built for it, may be quietly costing you decades of cognitive sharpness. The NIH study also flagged something specific. The participants with the worst long-term outcomes weren't the people who occasionally woke early. They were the people who forced early waking on weekdays and then slept late on weekends, creating a chronic cycle of circadian misalignment. The researchers called this pattern chronodisruption cycling, and they found it in the sleep data of over 60% of the participants who reported following productivity-based early wake routines. 60%. You set that alarm on purpose. You chose 5 a.m., and maybe that was the right call. If you're in that 15% way, if mornings genuinely feel natural, if your energy is highest before 7 a.m., if you wake without an alarm already in that window, then the science supports what you're doing. But if you've been fighting it, if every morning feels like pulling yourself out of something your body isn't ready to leave, that feeling is not weakness. It's data. Your brain was telling you something. The cortisol wasn't ready. The REM wasn't finished. The adenosine wasn't cleared. Here's what the science actually recommends. Find your natural wake time, not the time you have to wake up. The time your body wakes up on its own when you have no alarm and no obligation. That time, or within 30 minutes of it, is your chronotype window. Protect 90 minutes inside that window for your most cognitively demanding work. Not email, not social media, the work that requires your full prefrontal cortex. Keep that window consistent, 7 days a week. The research is clear that weekend catch-up sleep doesn't repair the cognitive debt from chronic early waking. It extends the circadian disruption. And if your job, your family, your life demands 5 a.m. regardless of your biology, then the most important thing you can do is protect your sleep from the other end. An earlier bedtime doesn't just add sleep hours, it adds REM hours. It lets the adenosine clear, it lets the memory consolidation finish. You don't have to choose between your obligations and your brain, but you do have to understand what your brain actually needs. The people selling 5 a.m. as a universal solution weren't lying to you. They were just describing their 15% experience as if it were a 100% truth. Now you know the difference. Maybe the change isn't waking at 5 a.m., maybe the change is waking at the time that's actually yours. If this shifted how you think about your mornings, there's a video on this channel that goes deeper into something we touched on today. It covers what happens to your brain during sleep deprivation, not the obvious effects, but the cognitive changes that begin after just one night of disrupted sleep, before you even feel tired. If you want the evidence without the noise, one video a week, no hype, that's what this channel is. Subscribe if that's the kind of content you're here for.